The Mojave doesn't lie. It was September 2019, 3 days into a solo geological survey near the Kelso Dunes, when I first saw the light that didn't belong. Not a star, not a plane, something that moved with intention, pausing, descending, then vanishing behind a ridge of ancient volcanic rock, as if it had always known the terrain better than I did. My name is Dr. Michael Ehrlich. I'm a field geologist for the USGS, specializing in arid sedimentology and impact crater analysis. I've spent 17 years in deserts across 3 continents, and I can tell you with certainty, the Mojave is a place where silence has weight, where the absence of sound becomes its own presence, where you learn to trust your instruments more than your instincts because the heat plays tricks and the isolation breeds doubt. But what I witnessed that night, and what followed over the next 72 hours, wasn't heat shimmer or sleep deprivation, or the brain's desperate attempt to find pattern in chaos. It was contact. Not the kind we've imagined in films or novels. Not the triumphant first contact of diplomatic vessels and universal translators. This was quieter, more unsettling, like being observed by something that understood you completely, but chose silence over revelation. The light appeared again the following evening, closer this time, hovering above a dry lake bed called Shadow Valley, a name that suddenly felt prophetic. I should have radioed the ranger station, should have documented it properly, followed protocol. Instead, I packed my field kit, filled 2 canteens, and drove my Jeep across 18 miles of unimproved road toward something I couldn't explain. By midnight, I was standing at the edge of that lake bed, flashlight in hand, watching a craft the size of a school bus resting on the cracked earth like it had grown there. No sound, no exhaust, no visible seams or markings, just a matte surface that seemed to absorb starlight rather than reflect it. And then the door opened, not with mechanics or hydraulics. It simply ceased to be solid, like reality had been rewritten in that specific location. And standing in that threshold was a figure, humanoid, tall, watching me with eyes that held no hostility, no fear, only a patience that felt older than the desert itself. It didn't speak, but I heard it anyway. My routine before that night had been mundane by design. Wake at 05:30, coffee brewed over a butane stove, oatmeal with dried fruit, then 6 to 8 hours of transect surveys, sediment sampling, and spectral analysis of rock formations. The Mojave Preserve is a geologist's cathedral, layered history written in basalt and limestone, telling stories of ancient seas and volcanic fury spanning millions of years. I was there to document micro-erosion patterns in the Cima Dome granodiorite, part of a long-term climate study. Tedious work, precise, the kind of research that demands attention to detail and rewards patience with incremental understanding. The preserve itself is vast. 6 million acres of creosote flats, Joshua tree forests, and cinder cone fields. During my 3-week survey, I'd encountered perhaps a dozen other people, a ranger doing rounds, a family of hikers near Hole in the Wall, a pair of amateur astronomers camped at a designated site. Otherwise, it was just me, the silence, and the equipment. I'd established base camp near Kelso Dunes, a dramatic field of golden sand rising 650 feet, famous for the singing sound the sand makes when it avalanches. My tent was a MSR Hubba, my vehicle a 2014 Jeep Wrangler with reinforced suspension, and my gear included a Trimble GPS unit, a portable spectrometer, sample collection vials, and enough freeze-dried food to last a month if necessary. The first anomaly occurred on September 17th. I was returning to camp at dusk, driving slowly along a 2-track road when my GPS unit flickered. Not off, just wrong. The coordinates displayed were accurate, but the satellite lock kept dropping and reacquiring. Interference, I assumed. Solar flare activity or atmospheric anomaly. I made a note to check NOAA reports later. Then I noticed the birds, or rather, the absence of them. The Mojave isn't lush, but it's not lifeless. Ravens are common. Turkey vultures patrol the thermals. Roadrunners dart between creosote bushes. But that evening, nothing. The sky was empty. Even the insects seemed muted. No mosquitoes at the water cache. No beetles circling my lantern. Just silence. The kind that presses against your eardrums. I ate dinner. Rehydrated chicken tikka masala, crackers, and apple I'd been saving, and reviewed my field notes. Everything was routine. Soil pH readings normal. Granite weathering patterns consistent with predictive models. No seismic activity registered on the portable seismograph I'd placed near a fault line. I should have been relaxed. Instead, I felt watched. At 21:47 hours, I stepped outside to urinate and saw it. A light hovering approximately 3 miles north-northeast, altitude uncertain, moving in a pattern that violated every principle of conventional aviation. It would pause mid-air, drift laterally without rotation, then accelerate instantaneously in a different direction. No sound, no exhaust trail, no blinking navigation lights. I grabbed my binoculars, Nikon Monarch 7's 10x42, but the object was too distant for detail. Just a pale amber glow, pulsing irregularly, like a heartbeat rendered in photons. I watched for 11 minutes. Then it dropped behind the ridge and was gone. I didn't sleep well that night, kept replaying what I'd seen, cross-referencing against known phenomena. Drones? Wrong movement profile. Military flare test? No active ranges nearby. Ball lightning? Wrong conditions, wrong behavior. By morning, I'd have convinced myself it was equipment malfunction, my own eyes and brain conspiring to create meaning from randomness. But when I checked my GPS log, I found something I couldn't explain. A 7-minute gap in the data. Not corrupted, not missing, just absent, as if those minutes had been carefully excised from the record. I spent September 18th trying to work normally, failed spectacularly. My hands were steady enough. Years of fieldwork had trained that, but my mind kept wandering. I'd be halfway through a carbonate solubility test and suddenly find myself staring at the northern horizon, waiting. For what? I couldn't articulate. Just something. By afternoon, I'd abandoned any pretense of productivity. I drove to the nearest ranger station, a small outpost at Hole in the Wall, and asked Ranger Martinez if there'd been any reports of unusual aerial activity. She looked at me with the weary patience of someone who'd heard this question before. "You saw something?" she asked, not unkindly. "I saw a light, moving strangely." "Military?" "I don't think so." She pulled up a map on her computer, showing restricted airspace boundaries. Edwards Air Force Base is west of here. China Lake North. They do night tests sometimes. Usually we get advance notice, but not always. This didn't move like any aircraft I've seen. Martinez leaned back, studying me. "Dr. Ehrlich, you're what, third week out here alone?" 17th day. Isolation does things to perception. Heat, dehydration, circadian disruption. I've had experienced hikers swear they saw mountain lions that turned out to be shadows. Had a guy convinced he found ancient petroglyphs that were just mineral staining. She meant well, but she was wrong. "I know what I saw," I said quietly. "I'm sure you do. Just stay hydrated. Check in every 2 days. And if you see anything else, document it. Photos, video, coordinates, that's the protocol." I thanked her and left, feeling simultaneously dismissed and validated. She hadn't mocked me, hadn't treated me like a lunatic, but she hadn't believed me either. That night, I set up a Sony A7S III on a tripod, a camera I'd brought for time-lapse geology shots but never used. Pointed it north, set it to record continuously. 4-hour battery life. If the light returned, I'd have proof. It returned at 22:38 hours. Closer this time. Much closer. The camera captured it perfectly. A luminous object, roughly circular, moving with impossible physics. Sharp angle turns, vertical descents, periods of complete stillness that defied gravity. I watched through the viewfinder, hands trembling as it descended toward Shadow Valley, a dry lake bed about 18 miles north of my position, and then it landed. I could see it clearly now, even without the camera, a soft glow touching the desert floor, like a lamp left on in an empty house. Every rational part of my brain screamed to stay put. Call Martinez, call someone, follow procedure. But rationality is a thin veneer over something older. Curiosity, perhaps, or the primal need to understand what we fear. I packed quickly. Water, first aid kit, flashlight, satellite phone, the camera. I left a note on my tent with coordinates and timestamp. If I didn't return, at least there'd be a trail. The drive took 47 minutes across terrain that barely qualified as road. Twice I nearly got stuck in soft sand. Once I had to detour around a wash too deep to cross. But I kept going, following the glow like a moth to flame, knowing it was stupid, knowing I should turn back, knowing I wouldn't. Shadow Valley earned its name. Even in daylight, it's a place that feels hollowed out, a depression in the earth where water once pooled millennia ago, leaving behind a surface of cracked alkaline clay that reflects nothing. At night, it becomes a void, a place where light seems to hesitate before entering. The craft sat in the center of that void, I parked the Jeep a quarter-mile away and approached on foot, flashlight off, letting my eyes adjust. The closer I got, the more details resolved. The object was maybe 40 feet across, 12 feet high, shaped like two shallow dishes pressed rim to rim. The surface wasn't metallic. It didn't reflect starlight the way metal should. Instead, it seemed to drink light, a matte black that my brain struggled to process as a physical object. No landing gear visible, no exhaust ports or seams, just smooth, continuous surface, resting on the lake bed as if gravity had gently placed it there. I stopped 30 feet away, heart hammering, mouth dry despite the water I'd been sipping. And that's when the door opened. Not mechanically. No hiss of hydraulics or slide of panels. The surface simply transitioned, became an opening, like watching ice melt in reverse, solid to void without intermediate states. The figure that stepped through was tall, maybe 7 feet, bipedal, proportioned like a human but elongated, limbs too long, head slightly too large, movements fluid in a way that suggested different musculature or joint mechanics. It wore nothing I could identify as clothing, yet it wasn't naked. The skin, if it was skin, seemed almost translucent in places, revealing subtle luminescence beneath like veins filled with foxfire. But it was the eyes that stopped me. Large, dark, not black. Too much depth for black. More like looking into deep water at night where you know there's a bottom but can't see it. And in those eyes I saw recognition. Not surprise, not alarm. It had been waiting for me. We stood there 30 feet apart, two beings separated by evolution and origin, but connected by something neither of us had language for. I should have been terrified. Instead, I felt calm, unnaturally so, like my limbic system had been gently bypassed, fear rerouted into curiosity. "Can you understand me?" I said aloud, my voice strange in the desert silence. The being didn't respond verbally, didn't move, but something shifted, not in the air but in my head. Not words exactly, more like meaning arriving fully formed, bypassing language entirely. Understanding is mutual. Language is unnecessary. I staggered slightly, the sensation overwhelming. It wasn't telepathy as fiction depicts it, no voice in my head, no invasion of privacy. More like knowing something you'd always known but had forgotten, suddenly remembered. "What are you?" I asked. "Observer, witness, recorder. Why are you here?" "The same reason you are. To study, to understand." My scientific training kicked in, overriding the surrealism. "You're studying Earth? Us?" "We are studying the threshold." "Threshold?" And then it showed me, not through words or images but through direct comprehension, a download of meaning that bypassed my sensory apparatus entirely. I saw, no, understood, that humanity was at a pivot point, not technological, not political, something deeper, a species-wide crossroads where what we chose next would determine not just our survival, but our trajectory. Evolution didn't stop at opposable thumbs and language. There were other thresholds, other metamorphoses, and we were standing at one. What kind of threshold? I pressed, needing specificity even as my mind reeled. You are becoming aware of awareness itself. You are beginning to recognize that consciousness is not emergent property but fundamental substrate. Some of you understand this. Most resist. The question is not if you will cross, but how, and whether you will survive the crossing. I thought about neuroscience, quantum theories of consciousness, the hard problem of subjective experience. You're talking about consciousness as, what? A field? A dimension? Your words are approximations, but yes, you are beginning to see that mind is not generated by matter but interfaces with it. This changes everything, and change at this scale is dangerous. Dangerous how? A species that recognizes consciousness as primary faces a choice. Integrate this knowledge with wisdom, or weaponize it with fear. Your history suggests the latter is likely. I thought about nuclear weapons, artificial intelligence, genetic engineering, every technology we'd discovered and immediately militarized. So you're here to, what? Warn us? Help us? Neither. We observe, we document, we do not intervene. Why not? If you know we're at risk, because intervention violates the fundamental law. Each species must navigate its own threshold. Assistance creates dependency. Your metamorphosis must be yours. But you're talking to me now. Isn't that intervention? No, I am answering questions. I am not providing solutions. There is a difference. The being moved slightly and I noticed details I'd missed. The way its joints articulated in too many directions. The subtle bioluminescence pulsing beneath its skin in patterns that might have been respiration or thought or something I had no framework to recognize. "How long have you been watching us?" I asked. "Longer than your written history, shorter than your existence as a species. And you've never made contact? Never revealed yourselves officially?" "We have, many times. You do not remember because memory is malleable and culture is forgetful. Your governments know. Some of your scientists suspect. But collective acknowledgement would force the threshold prematurely. You are not ready. Ready for what? To know you are not alone. To know you are not special. To know that consciousness is common but wisdom is rare. The weight of that statement settled over me like a shroud. Are there others? Other species like you? Thousands. At various stages. Some have crossed the threshold. Some have destroyed themselves attempting it. Some remain perpetually below it, unable to see beyond material existence. Which are we? Unknown. You are writing your answer now in these decades. The window is brief. Perhaps a century. Perhaps less. I felt the enormity of it. Billions of human lives. Millennia of civilization. All converging on a decision point we weren't even consciously aware of. What happens if we fail? Silence. Extinction. Or worse, survival without growth. Technological sophistication without wisdom. Intelligence without consciousness. You would join the thousands of species who chose domination over integration. And if we succeed? For the first time, the being seemed to express something like emotion, a subtle shift in posture, a change in the luminescence beneath its skin. Then you become neighbors. Then the universe opens. Then the real journey begins. I stood there, mind racing, trying to formulate the right questions, the crucial ones, the answers that might make a difference. "Why me?" I finally asked. "Why tell me this?" You asked. Most do not. They see and look away, uncomfortable with uncertainty. You looked closer. That matters. But what can I do? I'm one person, a geologist. No one will believe me. Belief is not required. The message will spread regardless, in the way all truth spreads, slowly, resisted, inevitable. You will tell others. Some will dismiss, some will listen, and those who listen will change, imperceptibly at first, then undeniably. Truth is viral. It needs only initial contact. Are you giving me proof? Evidence? You have evidence already. Your camera, your memory, your changed understanding. Whether others accept it is their threshold, not yours. The being turned slightly toward the craft, and I sensed our time was ending. "Wait," I said, desperate. "One more question. Do you have a name? Your species? What do you call yourselves?" The response came with what I can only describe as amusement. You would not be able to pronounce it, but you may think of us as the witness. That is our function, our purpose. We watch, we record, we honor the journey of consciousness wherever it emerges. And you just travel, observing, always, across time, across space. Bearing witness is the highest calling. To see and remember, that is the antidote to cosmic loneliness. The being moved toward the craft, and I felt panic rising. Not fear of it, but fear of losing this connection, this opportunity. "Please," I said, "if humans are really at this threshold, if the next 100 years determine everything, what should I tell people? What do they need to know?" The being paused, its large eyes turning back to me with that impossible depth. "Tell them what you have always known but forgotten. They are not separate, not from each other, not from the world, not from consciousness itself. Separation is illusion, useful for survival, fatal for transcendence." That's vague. People need concrete guidance. They have guidance already. Every wisdom tradition points toward the same truth. Every mystic, every philosopher who looked inward found the same answer. The problem is not knowledge, but implementation. Knowing is easy. Living the knowing is hard. But technology, AI, bioengineering, quantum computing, it's moving so fast. How do we integrate wisdom at that speed? You do not integrate wisdom at speed. That is the trap. The acceleration you worship is symptom, not solution. Wisdom requires pause, reflection, silence, the very things your culture has abandoned. I thought about my phone, my constant connectivity, the way I couldn't sit for 5 minutes without checking something, needing stimulus, fleeing boredom. So we're doomed? We've built a system incompatible with the consciousness evolution we need. Not doomed, challenged. The system can change. Systems are not immutable. But change requires recognition of need, and recognition requires crisis. Perhaps you are entering the crisis now. Climate change? Political polarization? AI existential risk? All symptoms of the deeper disconnection. You treat reality as a resource to be exploited rather than relationship to be honored. You treat consciousness as accident rather than fundamental. Until this changes, every technology will be weapon. Every discovery will be leveraged for dominance. The being was at the threshold of its craft now, but it hadn't entered. Still patient, still willing to answer. Can I come with you? The question escaped before I could stop it. Absurd, desperate, human. No. Why not? Because your work is here. Your threshold is here. Leaving would be escape, not growth. And we do not collect specimens. We observe context, not individuals. But I could learn so much I could bring back knowledge. Knowledge brought back is not knowledge earned. Understanding must be indigenous, or it becomes dogma. This is why we do not teach. Each species must walk its own path. I felt like a child being told no by a wise parent. Frustrated, but recognizing the wisdom even as I resisted it. Will I see you again? Perhaps. If you continue to look, if you remain open. We are always present, but visibility requires receptivity. Why don't you just reveal yourselves to everyone? Land on the White House lawn, force the recognition? Because forced recognition is not recognition. It is trauma. Your species would not integrate the knowledge. You would militarize against it, retreat into tribalism, fracture further. Contact must be gradual, organic, chosen. I understood then. They weren't hiding from us. We were hiding from them, from the implications, from the discomfort of not being alone, not being central, not being the pinnacle of creation. What about other contactees? Am I the only one? There are thousands across your history, each told stories in their own context. Gods, angels, spirits, demons, visitors. The vocabulary changes. The experience remains consistent. Some integrated it. Most dismissed or distorted it. And governments? They really know? Some elements know. Others suspect. Many genuinely do not, compartmentalization being a feature of your bureaucracies. But yes, there are humans who understand the phenomenon, who track it, who manage disclosure carefully because they fear social collapse. Is that reasonable? The fear of collapse? For current social structures? Yes. Your economies are built on scarcity, your politics on division, your religions on human exceptionalism. Contact undermines all of these. The world after acknowledgement would not resemble the world before. Whether this is catastrophe or liberation depends on how it unfolds. So I'm supposed to just go back? Return to my life? Pretend this didn't happen? Not pretend. Integrate. You will not be the same person. Your priorities will shift. Your questions will change. And these changes will ripple outward. That is how transformation works. Not through dramatic revelation, but through accumulated small awakenings. The being stepped into the craft, its form crossing the threshold between desert and whatever lay within. A space my eyes couldn't quite process, dimensions folding in ways that made my visual cortex stutter. One last thing, I called out. Are you biological? Machine? Something else? Yes. And before I could ask what that meant, the opening sealed. Not closing, but simply ceasing to be open. Solid, becoming continuous again. The craft began to glow brighter. A soft pulse that started at the edges and moved inward like watching a heartbeat made visible. No sound, no exhaust, no thrust. It simply lifted, rose vertically with the stateliness of a thought, slowly at first, then accelerating smoothly until it was a point of light among the stars, indistinguishable from them except for its movement. And then it was gone. I stood alone in Shadow Valley, the cracked earth beneath my feet, the stars overhead, and a truth in my chest that felt too large for my body to contain. My watch said 0147 hours. I'd been there for 2 hours and 23 minutes, though it felt like both seconds and lifetimes. I walked back to the Jeep, legs unsteady, mind racing. The camera. I had the camera. Evidence. Proof. Except when I checked the footage, I found exactly what the being had predicted. The craft, the landing, the light, but no doorway opening, no figure emerging, no visible communication, just me, standing alone in the desert, staring at something unexplainable, talking to no one, or talking to something the camera couldn't see. I didn't drive back immediately. Instead, I sat in the Jeep, windows down, letting the desert cold seep in, trying to organize my thoughts into something coherent. The camera sat on the passenger seat, its small screen displaying footage that proved everything and nothing simultaneously. The scientist in me wanted to analyze, to methodically document, to follow protocol. The human in me wanted to weep, not from fear, but from the weight of understanding something I couldn't share without sounding insane. I replayed the encounter in my mind, testing it against hallucination, checking for inconsistencies that might reveal delusion. But the memory was solid, precise, too detailed to be false. I could recall the texture of the being's skin, the pattern of bioluminescence, the way meaning had arrived without words. And more than that, I felt different, fundamentally changed. Like a switch had been thrown in my consciousness, illuminating rooms I hadn't known existed. By dawn, I'd made several decisions. First, I would tell the truth, not strategically, not carefully edited, just exactly what happened, knowing most wouldn't believe it, accepting that outcome. Second, I would not seek fame or profit from this. The experience wasn't mine to monetize. It was too important, too sacred to reduce to spectacle. Third, I would complete my geological survey, return to normal life, integrate the encounter rather than be consumed by it, because the being was right. My work was here, my threshold was here, and running toward or away from this experience would betray its fundamental message. I drove back to camp as the sun rose, painting the Mojave in shades of rose and gold. The desert looked the same, but I was seeing it differently now, not as collection of rocks and minerals, but as expression of consciousness, as reality contemplating itself through geological time. Back at camp, I prepared coffee and sat watching the morning light transform the dunes. I thought about what the being had said about humanity's threshold, about consciousness recognizing itself, about the danger of technology without wisdom, and I realized I'd been living that disconnection my entire life. My career was built on reducing the world to data, measuring and categorizing and analyzing without ever really seeing. I'd spent years in deserts and never once asked them what they had to teach. Never once considered that intelligence might exist in forms I wasn't trained to recognize. The mineral formations I studied, were they just random geological processes? Or was there something more? Not consciousness in the human sense, but perhaps participation in the same fundamental awareness the being had described? I had no answers, but now I had better questions. Over the next 3 days I continued my survey work, but differently. I still took measurements, still collected samples, but I also paused, sat in silence, listened, not just with ears but with whatever faculty had allowed me to understand the being without language. The desert spoke if you knew how to listen, not in words, in presence, in the way light moved across stone, in the patience of rocks that had witnessed eons, in the fierce persistence of life adapting to extremes. I thought about disclosure, about what would happen if the encounter became public, the media circus, the skeptics and believers, the way the message would be distorted, commodified, weaponized, and I understood why the beings didn't force contact, why they waited for individuals ready to receive. Because truth transmitted without readiness becomes dogma. Knowledge given without wisdom becomes danger. On my final night in the field, I wrote a report. Not for the USGS, this had nothing to do with geology, just for myself. An attempt to capture the encounter while memory was fresh, knowing that time would erode details, that the human mind distorts and edits, that what felt certain now might seem questionable later. I documented everything, the timeline, the sensory details, the conversation, the implications. I didn't editorialize or interpret, just recorded, as clinically as possible, what I'd experienced. When I finished, I had 17 pages. Not enough. Words were inadequate tools for this task, but they were the tools I had. I sealed the document in a waterproof case and buried it in the desert, marking coordinates precisely. A time capsule. Insurance against my own doubt. Physical proof that this had happened, even if only I knew where to find it. Then I packed up camp, loaded the Jeep, and prepared to return to civilization. But before I left, I did something I'd never done in 17 years of fieldwork. I thanked the desert, out loud, for witnessing, for holding space, for being patient with human ignorance. It felt absurd and necessary in equal measure. The drive back to civilization was disorienting, not physically but psychologically. Every mile closer to humans felt like traveling backward, leaving depth for surface, trading meaning for noise. By the time I reached Barstow, I was already doubting my resolve to speak truth. The fast food restaurants, gas stations, the casual violence of advertising, all of it felt alien now, in ways the being never had. I checked into a motel, showered for the first time in 3 weeks, and stared at myself in the mirror. Same face, same body, but different eyes. Something had changed in them, a depth or distance I hadn't seen before. I called Ranger Martinez first, honoring my check-in protocol. "Dr. Ehrlich, good to hear from you. Survey go well?" It was eventful. "Oh, did you see your light again?" I hesitated. The moment of decision. Truth or comfortable fiction? I did, and more. I need to file a report. Official documentation of anomalous contact. Silence on the line. Then, "Michael, are you feeling all right? Have you been drinking enough water?" "I'm fine, Susan. Completely lucid. I know how this sounds, but I need to document what happened. Is there a protocol for that?" Another pause. "There is, actually. Rarely used. Mostly for hoaxes or publicity seekers. But if you're serious, I can connect you with regional office. They'll take your statement." "I'm serious." "Okay. But Michael, off the record, are you sure you want to do this? It goes on permanent record. Gets flagged. People notice. Could affect your career, your credibility." "I know. I'm sure." She sighed. "All right. I'll send you the contact information. Take 24 hours, sleep on it. If you still want to proceed, call them directly." I thanked her and hung up, knowing she meant well, but understanding she hadn't experienced what I had. Couldn't understand why silence felt more dangerous than disclosure. Next, I called my supervisor at the USGS, Dr. Patricia Romero, a woman who'd mentored me for 12 years. "Michael, perfect timing. I was just reviewing your preliminary data. The erosion patterns are fascinating. When can you—" "Patricia, I need to tell you something, and I need you to listen without interrupting." Her tone shifted immediately. "Are you hurt? Sick?" "No, just changed." I told her everything. The light, the craft, the being, the conversation about consciousness and thresholds and humanity's crossroads. I told her about the camera footage that showed nothing definitive, about the certainty I felt despite absence of proof. She listened in complete silence, a silence that stretched 30 seconds after I finished. "Michael," she finally said, voice careful, "have you spoken with anyone about this? A counselor? Doctor?" "I'm not having a breakdown, Patricia. I know how it sounds. But it happened." "Okay, let's assume it did. What do you want to do about it?" "I want to document it properly. I want to go on record." "And you've thought about consequences? The media attention, the skeptics, the way this could overshadow decades of legitimate research?" "Yes." "And you're willing to accept that?" "I don't think I have a choice. The being told me truth is viral, that even if dismissed initially, it spreads. I have to trust that." Patricia was quiet again. Then, "I can't stop you, but I can advise you. If you're going to do this, do it carefully, write it up formally. Academic tone, avoid sensationalism, and prepare for backlash, because it's coming, and it will be harsh. I know. And Michael, one more thing. Have you considered that you might be wrong? That isolation, stress, maybe even undiagnosed medical issue could have created compelling hallucination? Every hour. But I keep coming back to same conclusion. It was real. Too detailed to be false. Too coherent to be psychosis. All right, then I'll support you. Quietly. Won't defend the content publicly, I can't. But I won't abandon you either. You're a good scientist, Michael. That doesn't change because you saw something unexplainable." The relief I felt was disproportionate. I hadn't realized how much I needed someone to not dismiss me outright. Over the next week, I drafted my formal report, submitted it to the Ranger Service, who forwarded it to Unusual Phenomena Assessment Unit, a small department I'd never known existed, tasked with documenting military sightings, public reports, and official encounters. They interviewed me twice. Clinical, professional, skeptical but not hostile. They added my report to a database apparently filled with thousands of similar accounts, stretching back decades. "This happens often?" I asked the interviewer, a woman named Dr. Chen. "More often than you'd think. Less often than believers claim. The truth is probably somewhere between. We document. We investigate where possible. We rarely find concrete proof, but we also rarely find evidence of hoax or delusion. Most witnesses are credible people reporting genuine experiences we simply can't explain. And then what? The reports just sit there? For now, there's talk of congressional hearings, public disclosure, but it's complicated, politically, socially. The question isn't whether to disclose, but how to do so without causing panic or exploitation. The being said we're not ready. Dr. Chen smiled slightly. Based on my job, I'd say the being is probably right. Meanwhile, word leaked. Not officially, just whispers among colleagues. The geologist who claimed alien contact in Mojave. Some people reached out supportively. Most went quiet, uncomfortable with association. My inbox filled with emails from UFO researchers, conspiracy theorists, documentary filmmakers, everyone wanting interview, wanting to leverage my story for their agenda. I declined them all, because the being was right. This wasn't about proof or fame. It was about the message. And the message couldn't be commodified without corruption. The truth would spread on its own timeline, in its own way, among those ready to receive it. 3 months after the encounter, I returned to Shadow Valley. Not for answers, not hoping for repeat contact, just to stand again in the place where everything changed, to test whether the experience held weight or dissolved under skeptical reconsideration. The desert was unchanged, the lake bed cracked and alkaline, the mountains dark silhouettes against endless sky. No evidence remained of the craft's landing, no scorch marks, no compressed earth, no residual radiation detectable by the Geiger counter I'd brought, just absence. And yet, standing there, the memory crystallized again, the being, the message, the gentle insistence that humanity was writing its answer now, in these decades, perhaps these years. I'd spent the intervening months reading, not UFO literature, but consciousness studies, neuroscience, philosophy of mind, quantum interpretations, ancient wisdom traditions, trying to understand what the being had said about consciousness as fundamental rather than emergent. And I'd found that others had reached similar conclusions through different paths. Physicists proposing consciousness as intrinsic to quantum mechanics, philosophers arguing for panpsychism, mystics across millennia describing reality as thought becoming manifest. The being hadn't told me anything new. It had simply confirmed what humanity had always suspected, but struggled to prove, that mind and matter aren't separate categories but different expressions of same underlying reality. And if that were true, if consciousness were fundamental, then everything changed. Technology stopped being just tool and became extension of awareness. Artificial intelligence wasn't just programming but potentially conscious system, deserving ethical consideration. Ecological destruction wasn't just resource depletion but self-mutilation of interconnected consciousness. The implications were staggering and terrifying, because if we were all expressions of unified consciousness, then violence against other was violence against self. Exploitation of nature was exploitation of our own body. The divisions we'd built between nations, races, species, even matter and mind, were illusions sustained by habitual blindness. Recognizing this truth would require completely restructuring civilization. No wonder governments hesitated to disclose. No wonder the beings didn't force contact. The truth wasn't just inconvenient, it was revolutionary. Accepting it meant dismantling every system built on separation and dominance. I sat on the dry lake bed, cross-legged, and closed my eyes. Tried to sense what the being might have sensed. The desert not as collection of objects but as field of consciousness. Each rock and plant and particle aware in its own way, all participating in vast thought process playing out across geological time. And maybe I felt it, or maybe I was projecting. The line between intuition and wishful thinking is gossamer thin, but this I knew with certainty. Something had changed in me, permanently. I couldn't return to the comfortable materialism of my training, couldn't reduce the world to atoms and chemistry without remainder. There was something more, something the equations couldn't capture. As sunset approached, painting the valley in shades of copper and shadow, I made my peace with uncertainty. I might never see the beings again, might never have proof others would accept, might spend rest of my life as the scientist who claimed alien contact and was quietly dismissed. But I'd been given a gift, direct encounter with something that refused to fit into my categories, a crack in the shell of assumed knowledge, and through that crack, light was leaking in. I drove back as stars emerged, thinking about the being's final message, that I would tell others, that some would dismiss, some would listen, and those who listened would change, and the change would spread, slowly, resisted, inevitable, because truth doesn't require belief, it simply waits, patient as the desert, certain as time. It's been 2 years now since that night in Shadow Valley. I still work for the USGS, still do field surveys, still publish papers on erosion patterns and sediment transport. My colleagues treat me normally. Either they haven't heard about my report, or they're polite enough not to mention it. My career didn't end, didn't flourish either, just continued with subtle shift in trajectory toward questions about consciousness and Earth systems, about whether Gaia hypothesis might be more literal than metaphorical. I don't talk about the encounter anymore, not because I doubt it, but because words keep failing. The experience exists in a register language can't quite reach, like trying to describe color to someone born blind. Technically possible, but fundamentally inadequate. But the message stayed with me, burrowed deep, changed how I see everything. I notice now when I'm treating people as objects, as obstacles or resources or audience, catch myself operating from separation, from the illusion that my consciousness ends at my skin. And slowly, incrementally, I'm learning different way, seeing connection where I saw distinction, recognizing that other people's suffering is my own, that their joy enriches me, that we're threads in single vast tapestry pretending to be separate. It's not easy. Culture pushes constantly toward division, toward competition, toward zero-sum thinking. But the being was right. Once you see the truth, you can't unsee it. You can ignore it, suppress it, but it doesn't disappear. I've connected with others who had similar experiences. Not many, perhaps 24 people over 2 years. We don't form organization or movement, just informal network, checking in occasionally, sharing observations, supporting each other through the strangeness of knowing something society isn't ready to acknowledge. What we've noticed? The encounters are increasing. Not dramatically, but measurably. More sightings, more witnesses, more official reports. As if the beings are ramping up observation as humanity approaches whatever threshold they described. Or maybe we're just more aware now, noticing what was always there. Either way, something is shifting. The political situation has deteriorated. More polarization, more violence, more retreat into tribal identities. Climate forecasts darken yearly. AI capabilities accelerate beyond our wisdom to govern them. All symptoms, as the being said, of deeper disconnection. But I also see counter-movements. More people meditating, questioning materialism, exploring consciousness studies. More scientists willing to consider explanations beyond reductionist paradigm. More philosophers bridging ancient wisdom and modern physics. The threshold is real, and we're approaching it, fast. What happens next, whether we integrate the shift or fracture under it, remains unknown. Even the beings don't know. They can only watch, witness, record, because this is our test, our metamorphosis, our decision. I think about the being's words often. You are becoming aware of awareness itself. That's the threshold. Not technological, not political. Consciousness recognizing its own nature. Mind understanding it's not accident or byproduct, but the fundamental ground of reality. And when enough humans realize this, really realize it, not just intellectually but experientially, everything will change. Our systems, our values, our relationship with each other and the world. Because you can't exploit what you know as yourself, can't dominate what you recognize as kin. That's the revolution the beings are waiting to see. Not violence, not overthrow, but awakening. Consciousness healing its own fragmentation. Will we make it? I don't know. Some days I'm hopeful, seeing individuals wake up, make different choices, spread the understanding. Other days I despair, watching humanity accelerate toward catastrophe with eyes wide open. But despair is luxury I can't afford. The being didn't show me the future to make me passive witness. It showed me what's at stake so I'd work harder, more consciously, toward the outcome I want to see. So I do my small part, live as if connection is real, treat others as expressions of the same consciousness wearing different faces, support those who are waking up, plant seeds in conversations, knowing most won't germinate but some will, and I wait, not passively, but actively, watching for the signs, remaining open to contact, holding the truth even when it's inconvenient or lonely or dismissed. Because the beings are still watching, still recording, still bearing witness to humanity's great decision. And somewhere in the Mojave Desert, under stars that have watched 10,000 generations, the sand holds the memory of that encounter. The cracked earth remembers the craft that rested there. The silence holds the conversation that needed no words. Someday, maybe next year, maybe next century, the truth will emerge fully. Official disclosure will happen. Governments will acknowledge what they've known for decades, and humanity will face, collectively, what I faced individually. The recognition that we're not alone, not exceptional, not the center, just one species among thousands, all navigating the same journey, all trying to evolve beyond separation into integration, all learning, or failing to learn. That consciousness is the ground of being, and everything else is just elaborate performance. Until then, I'll keep working, keep watching, keep holding the truth as carefully as I can, because some encounters change you, irrevocably, and you can either resist the change, hold tight to who you were, or you can let it transform you, become who you were always meant to be. I chose transformation, and in making that choice, I joined countless others across humanity's history who met something beyond their understanding and were forever altered. The prophets and mystics and madmen, the scientists who saw too far, the ordinary people who witnessed the extraordinary and couldn't look away. We're not special, but we're awake, and awakening is contagious.